Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this talk presented virtually on Tuesday, 21 September 2021 by the Border Historical Society. Under normal circumstances, pre-COVID, we would have held our monthly talks in the Marjorie Courtenay Latimer Hall in the East London Museum. In the month of September, the talk would have been presented as the Mark Taylor Memorial Lecture. Mark Taylor was a teacher in East London with a keen interest in local history, and was serving as the chairman of the Border Historical Society when he died in 1984. The annual talk commemorates his legacy. Our speaker, Dr Patrick Hutchison, is a general practitioner in East London. Dr Hutch attended boarding school at Dale College in King Williamstown and graduated from Stellenbosch University. He has an insatiable interest in the history of the Transkei and a substantial reference library relating to the history of this area. Dr. Hutch's talk is titled Presbyterians in Xhosaland, from Lovedale to Tutura. We have muted all participants such that the talk is not interrupted. Without further ado, I will hand the platform over to Dr. Hutchison. Thank you.
The Mark Taylor Memorial Lecture commemorates the founding chairman of the Border Historical Society, and I believe his daughter Margie Coots is with us from Plettenberg Bay. I would like to acknowledge a tremendous amount of technical assistance from William Martinson and Grace Battis-Martinson. This is not an academic dissertation. The aim is to pique your interest to explore the subject on the internet or your library or your local library. It is also background for a tour of Tumi Valley on the 30th of October this year and the Emgwali Paterson missions in February 2022. Thank you. Presbyterians in Xhosaland, from Lovedale to Tutura. A brief review of the Glasgow Missionary Society, the GMS, and the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland, UPCS, advance into the Transkei. This talk aims to provide an introduction, some context and perspective for a day tour from Emgwali to Mbulu mission sites. It is a scant summary of a vast subject extensively recorded elsewhere. The path of the Presbyterian mission progress into Transkei crosses the Great Kai River at its middle drift, known as Gaikeford. My personal interest in this drift lies in the fact my great-grandparents lost their first 3 children in 1872 when the ferry boat overturned while crossing the Kai in flood here. When Presbyterians crossed the Kai, in essence, they were following in service of their flock. Their labours about the Amatolas were primarily missions to the Nika tribes. Over time, it transpired that the Mfengu people were far more receptive to their teachings and formed an ever-increasing part of their congregations. The Presbyterian progression is in this sequence: Necha Lovedale, Balfour, Piri, Burns Hill, Ikubicha, Emgwali, Henderson, Mbulu Paterson, Tutura Mission. The Glasgow Missionary Society for Propagating the Gospel in Heathen Countries was formed in February 1796. 23 ministers of various denominations and 13 laymen were present at the formal meeting chaired by Reverend Alexander Piri. The Reverend Robert Balfour was appointed secretary. Also present was Reverend John Burns. From the outset, correspondence and cooperation was kept with the London Missionary Society, formed 5 months earlier in September 1795, and their secretary, Dr. John Love, who incidentally was a Presbyterian. Love became chairman of the Glasgow Missionary Society in 1807 and was the secretary from 1809 till his death in 1825. The first two missionaries the GMS sent out to the Cape were Reverend William Ritchie Thomson and as colleague catechist Mr. John Benny. They made their initial headquarters at Chumi, arriving there in November 1821. Reverend John Brownlee established this mission on the Mbulu stream, a western tributary of the Tumi River, in June 1820. Chumi was sited on an earlier outstation of the Cat River Mission of Reverend Joseph Williams, London Missionary Society. The Cat River Mission was founded in July 1816 and flourished until William's death in August 1818. His most notable convert was Nsikana. Reverend John Ross was in April 1823 the first minister of the Church of Scotland to be designated a missionary. He arrived at Chumi on the 16th of December 1823 with his wife Helen and a printing press. In November 1824, Ross and Benny established the first GMS mission in Kaffraria on the Xhosa stream, an eastern tributary of the Tumi River at a site some 12 miles southeast of the Tumi mission. When Dr. Love died a year later, the Xhosa mission was renamed Lovedale. In 1825, Brownlee resumed his connection with the LMS and left Chumi to establish a new station on the Buffalo River. In 1827, the field was reinforced by the addition of the catechist Mr. William Chalmers and two industrial missionaries, Mr. James Weir and Mr. Alexander McDermott. By 1828, Chumi was staffed by Reverend Thomson, Mr. Weir, and the native teacher, Mr. Robert Balfour. At Lovedale were Benny, Chalmers, and the native teacher, Charles Henry. This allowed for Reverend Ross and Mr. McDermott to open a new station named Balfour at the foot of the Catberg, near the great place of Chief Mapoma. 14 months later, this station was abandoned when the chief and his people were evicted from the Cat River Valley. The remnants of the first citizens of the country, the Khoi, who had gathered around several London Missionary Society mission stations, were then granted occupation of this fertile valley. As a government salaried missionary, Reverend Thomson at Chumi fell under the suspicion of the Xhosa chiefs. His life was repeatedly threatened. In 1830, he accepted a government post at Balfour as minister to the Cat River settlement. 225 members of the Chumi congregation left to follow him to Balfour. This left only 7 members behind at Chumi. In June 1830, Burns Hill Mission was begun by Mr. McDermott and Reverend Chalmers near the great place of the late Chief Nika, 15 miles east of Lovedale. It was here that my great-grandparents were married on the 12th of December 1871. This became Reverend James Lang's station. In May that year, Piri Mission was begun by Reverend Ross on the spot further east where Van der Kemp had dwelt in 1800. This is the Ross Memorial Church. In 1832, substantial stone buildings replaced the initial temporary structures at Lovedale. In the War of 1834-5, the mission stations were destroyed. The Ross infant's tombstone on the Xhosa is perhaps the first instance of an isiXhosa inscription on stone. In 1836, the mission board decided to abandon the old Lovedale site on the Xhosa and build a new Lovedale 4 miles west of the old on the Tumi River. Here a school was opened in September 1838. The Lovedale Seminary building was completed 6 months after Mr. Govan arrived at Lovedale as superintendent tutor in 1841. By the time the Seventh Frontier War broke out in 1846, there were 26 pupils in the seminary. Governor Maitland ordered the missionaries and traders to vacate Xhosaland, and Lovedale was closed. Govan resigned and returned to Scotland with 4 pupils, William Thomson, Bryce and Richard Ross, and Tiyo Soga. Now I must digress and give some history of the Presbyterian Church, the Church of Scotland, or the Kirk. The Church of England and the Church of Scotland were eventually both Protestant and vigorously anti-Catholic, but the two were very different entities. The Anglican is Episcopalian, that is, governed by bishops appointed by the Crown. The Scottish Kirk is governed by assemblies of ministers and laymen, presbyteries and sessions. The Scottish Reformed Church had come into being not thanks to the Crown, but in spite of it. And that tradition persisted. In the first half of the 16th century, the Catholic Archbishop of St. Andrews, Cardinal John Beaton, had Protestants burnt at the stake who would not recant. In 1560, Elizabeth was recognized in Scotland as the Queen of England, and the authority of the Pope was abolished. Henceforth, the Church of Scotland was governed by Kirk sessions of lay elders and later by district presbyteries possessing the power to ordain ministers. The General Assembly of the Kirk met once or twice a year. It soon became a forum for Scottish opinion on secular as well as ecclesiastical matters. With the union of the kingdoms of Scotland and England in 1707, trouble arose in particular over the question of patronage, which had been restored shortly after the union. This was not finally abolished until 1874. While the moderates in the Church of Scotland gradually came to accept their position as members of the established church, the evangelicals found it less easy to reconcile themselves to the control of the Parliament at Whitehall, the vast majority of whose members were neither Scottish nor Presbyterian. The 10 years conflict in the 1830s split the Scots into those who supported the state church and those who supported the voluntary principle. In Scotland, the Glasgow Missionary Society split into 2 sections, that adhering to the principles of the Church of Scotland and the Glasgow South African Missionary Society. At the Cape, in May 1838, at a meeting held at New Lovedale, the old missionary board was dissolved. Benny, Ross, MacDiarmid, Weir and Lang chose to adhere to the GMS, adhering to the principles of the Church of Scotland. They retained the properties of Lovedale, Burns Hill, and Pirrie. On the other hand, William Chalmers and Niven chose the Glasgow South African Missionary Society and retained the properties of Chumi and Ikubicha. The separation was amicable and they continued to meet in one presbytery until 1842. In 1843 in Scotland, roughly 1/3 of the church broke away to form the Free Church of Scotland, the FCS, under the leadership of Reverend Thomas Chalmers. In 1847, the numerous minor splinter groups which had split off prior to 1843 resolved to unite to form the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland, the UPCS. Together with the old established Church of Scotland, these schisms divided the Scottish Church into three main groups. In time, Lovedale, Burns Hill, and Pirrie fell under the FCS, and Chumi and Ikubicha came under the UPCS. At the Cape in 1897, these three groups united to form the Presbyterian Church of South Africa, the PCSA, autonomous and separate from the mother churches in Scotland. This was with the full blessing of all the church assemblies in Scotland. The Free Church Presbytery of Caffraria, including Lovedale, however, refused to join the new church. By 1829, in Scotland, the churches of Scotland had reunited in the Church of Scotland. This was not reflected in South Africa, where tensions between the missions remained acute. Looking at Arrowsmith's map of 1847, the great detail ends at the frontier along the Kaiskama-Tumi rivers. Beyond that, the sparse details reflect the unfamiliarity regarding the land of the Tambukis and the Amakosa. Beyond the Kai, this uncertainty is more frankly conceded in the stippled lines of the rivers Namakwa and Goa. The courses of the Gamka, Kabosi, Debakazi, and Somo rivers are really not accurate. Clearly, this territory is unknown. Where the Surveyor General of the colony, Lieutenant Colonel Michel and John Arrowsmith, are more certain of their facts, it is where we can clearly see the line of march of the soldiers between the forts established in the 1835 province of Queen Adelaide. The military route from the Kaiskama to the Great Kai lies along the upper zone of the country belonging to the Ndlambe Xhosa, the Tlhambi tribes, from Line Drift to Jingo's Camp and on to King Williamstown. Then Glen Aberdeen on the Cahoon, Fort Wellington on the Garnubi, and on to Fort Warden and Smith's Tower near the Kai, as the descent is made to the lower Kai Drift in that great ravine. The military route through Nuka country, that of the Gaika tribes, is from Block Drift to Fort Cox and from Fort Wilshire to Fort White and on to King Williamstown. The map shows a wealth of details concerning the Nukas about the Amatolas, and this is in no small measure due to the other names indicated: Chumi, Lovedale, Burns Hill, and Pirrie. The point that the map drives home very forcefully is that in 1847, the colony extended to the Tumi-Kaskama line. Beyond this was independent Xhosaland. Traders and missionaries were slowly getting to know more about this dark Africa. In 1848, Mr. Tiyo Soga returned from Scotland and taught at Ikubucha and Uniondale, the later Kaskama Hook. In June 1851, Tiyo returned to Scotland with Reverend Niven to study for the ministry. He was ordained in December 1856. In 1857, he entered the missionary service of the United Presbyterian Church of Scotland and sailed for the Cape with his wife, Janet Burnside. The Emgwali Mission. This mission was founded in the aftermath of the cattle-killing devastation of the Xhosa nation after the terrible effects of starvation led the destitute believers in the delusion to attack and plunder the unbelievers, among whom were the Christian converts. In September 1857, Reverends Robert Johnson and Tiyo Soga led a band of Christians who had gathered for refuge at Peelton Mission Station to the new mission lands granted on the Emgwali stream. After 6 months, 2 small cottages and a church of wattle and daub had been built. In autumn of 1859, Johnson was called to a Grahamstown church, and it was left to Soga to replace the little church, which very soon had proved to be inadequate. The first subscriber was Chief Sandile himself, who offered 5 shillings per month. Prince Alfred visited and procured a government grant of £50, together with a handsome Bible and pulpit cushion. The colonists also donated generously. In 1861, the new church was founded and Miss Ogilvie opened a girls' school in a thatched cottage nearby with 66 pupils. This developed into a substantial boarding school for girls, the building which we see here. At this time, Soga's old friend Reverend John Chalmers returned from Scotland and joined the Emgwali Mission. On the 15th of June 1862, the new church was officially opened. Charles Brownlee, the Gaika Commissioner, presided. Among those present were Mr. Govan of Lovedale and Reverend John Brownlee of King Williamstown. The building could accommodate 700. It cost £1,465, of which Soga raised 600. It was the cathedral of the UPCS mission in Kafreria. The manse was built in 1863, and the eucalyptus trees were planted by Soga. In 1864, Reverend John Sclater and his sister arrived at Emgwali. This allowed Reverend John Chalmers to move to open the Henderson Mission. Tutura Mission, Xhosaland. In 1865, Sahili was allowed to reoccupy the coastal third part of his former country between the Kai and the Bashi rivers, after being exiled in Bomvana land since 1857, being blamed for the cattle-killing disaster which decimated his people. They were reduced to an estimated 15,000 souls. The remainder of his former territory was granted to the rapidly increasing Fingo people west of the Kai and to the emigrant Tembu. The districts of Butterworth, Iduchwa, Namakwe, and Tsomo came into being and were designated Fingerland. This migration caused the loss to the Emgwali mission of about a third of their membership when 5 chiefs and their people crossed the Kai into Fingerland. To continue their ministry and missions to these people, the Free Church of Scotland, FCS, established a mission station east of the Toma River on the Toleni stream. Here, Reverend Richard Ross established the Cunningham Mission Station. The United Presbyterian Church of Scotland, UPCS, established the Paterson Mission Station on the Mbulu River in the center of that part of Fingerland west of the Toma River. On the 12th of July, 1865, Reverend Tiyo Soga and Reverend Bryce Ross of Lovedale left Emgwali and arrived 3 days later at Sahili's great place, Holela. They were well received. Sahili made it clear he would only accept one missionary in his country. This led to the establishment of the Tutura Mission Station by the UPCS. In 1867, several changes occurred in response to the call for missions to be established beyond the Kai. Reverend James Davidson left King Williamstown to take over Emgwali. Reverend Sclater went to the mission at Mbulu, and in June 1868, Reverend Soga went to establish Tutucha, the mission to Sahili. Reverend Tiyo Soga arrived at Tutucha on the 4th of June 1868. He was supported by a new colleague who was a skilled physician, the Reverend William Girdwood, and 3 evangelists, Festichi Soga, his older brother, Jan Boy, and Quinty. There was a membership of 18 Christians. On the 16th of April 1871, the new Tutucha church, replacing the first wattle and daub structure, was consecrated. It measured 20 by 40 feet, and the debt was cleared on the opening day. Soga died on the 12th of August that year, 1871, in his 42nd year. Mbulu Paterson Mission, Tsomo, UPCS. The missionaries of the FCS at Lovedale and those of the UPCS at Emgwali cooperated in a brotherly spirit in allocating their different mission fields. Both sought 2 additional missionaries to be sent out from Scotland, 1 each for Fingerland and Galekaland. They agreed to visit their people across the Kai once a quarter, traveling together as companions until such time as new missionaries could be provided to establish permanent missions. In August 1866, Reverend Richard Ross and Reverend Tiyo Soga itinerated. The Fingo immigrants had established themselves along the banks of the watercourses. Unlike the mission lands allocated west of the Kai earlier, the scarcity of disposable land meant that the Fingo chiefs granted land sufficient only for the ploughing grounds of a missionary and his teacher, besides the sites for the mission and school buildings. The converts were not allowed to settle on mission lands, remaining on the lands that were allocated by their chiefs. The implication of this, of course, was that their feudal overlords were the chiefs and not the church. To quote Soga's report of September 1866, the Mbulu Kweza district is our present rallying point. the property of our late Bolo Christians and the headquarters of our missionary itinerations between the Kai and the Tsoma. The next district of the Mbulu River is the place for a mission station. To that of the Bolo people it is quite near, being divided from it only by a ridge of hills. The spot where the mission station would be is only half a mile from the Mbulu Kweza. It is a splendid site in every way. It stands in an open space between two streams at the base of fine woody mountains with an extensive southern aspect. The area was owned by the Fingo chief Moni, who was eager to receive a missionary. It was the most central and extensive area with the largest population and had the greatest natural capabilities and resources. Soga's report continued. The country between the Kai and the Tsoma rivers possesses more of the grand scenery of nature. It is mountainous, hilly, rocky, and broken up, but not barren. Soga had been on furlough in Cape Town for 6 months to recover from his throat affliction. He called it preacher's throat. It was, in fact, tuberculosis. 2 weeks after resuming duties at Emgwali, he took his turn to itinerate with Richard Ross. It took upwards of 20 days of long, constant, and often wearisome horse riding. On the second day, they crossed the Kai Drift at noon. They left the wagon to take the roundabout route to Mbulu Kweza, while they took a more direct route on horseback, crossing the mountains between the Kaba and the Mbulu Kweza, which we can see in this picture. On Sunday, 12th of August, Soga preached in the morning and Ross in the afternoon to 90 souls. After the services, they were busy organizing the church, examining certificates and enrolling members. There were 43 members, including 2 elders and 5 candidates, whom they formed into a class. Thus, there was already a church congregation at Mbulu awaiting a minister. In 1867, Reverend Sclater went to the Mbulu River to establish that mission. There he made short journeys in his wagon of 10 to 12 mile circuits, which occupied between 8 and 10 days. Halting at the larger villages, he would hold services. A center was chosen for each circuit, and these developed into outstations. A school was opened at Mbulu and taught by a native Christian. Classes for adult inquirers were conducted during the week by the missionary, and he listened to any visitors, no matter what their business. For months, Sclater preached at Mbulu under the shade of a big thorn tree. When a hut and church was built at the foot of the hill, the mission was named after Reverend Paterson, his mentor in Scotland. Present at the opening of the church on the 9th of January 1872 was Major Milan of the 75th Regiment garrisoned in King Williamstown. There were by then 200 converts in a population of 7,000. The church cost £150 and the debt was cleared on the opening day, the red-blanketed heathens also making their contributions. Major Milan retired from the army to join the mission. He took charge of the mission when Sclater went to Scotland on furlough in 1873. He founded a mission 8 miles south of the Bashi at Upolo. This was later named after him. At Milan's personal expense, the Reverend Quince Noble with 2 assistants were placed at Upolo. Milan died in May 1881. When Reverend James Davidson replaced Sclater in 1876, the congregation had grown from the original 43 members to 300, and this had by 1894 reached 700 with 250 candidates. Outstations had been established at Insisininde, Lutuli, Xolobe, Isigubudweni, and Matinjini. There were 28 ploughs at Lutuli. There was a watercourse at Paterson irrigating an orchard. There were 50 voluntary workers, including 26 elders and 4 deacons. There were 8 day schools with 15 teachers and 500 scholars. In 1877, one of their pupils took the top honours in the government native examinations. In 1881, the new church and school were consumed after being struck by lightning. The current building is dated 1882. From 1879 to 1882, a young lady missionary volunteer from Scotland, after learning the basics of isiXhosa at Emgwali, was sent to assist Mrs. Davidson at Paterson. The Xhosa battled to pronounce her name, Miss Moore. In time, she became known as Smoyana, a little breath of wind. She returned to Scotland, was married and widowed. When she volunteered to be a self-supporting missionary back at Paterson, she asked not to be an assistant. She asked rather to be given the challenge of the most difficult and backward outstation. And Reverend Davidson had no hesitation in deciding that was Xolobe outstation. In 1886, Mrs. Christina Forsyth returned to Mbulu as an unpaid evangelist teacher to serve the Xolobe community. At first she was regarded with suspicion, but by 1894 she was highly regarded in the tribal community. She built a modest dwelling and a little chapel school for about 60 pupils. By 1894, about 170 pupils had been taught by her, of which 40 had become baptized Christians. She had a native helper, Emily Ntintili, who was supported by the Greenock Ladies Kafrerian Society. In 1894, this society presented the Upper Xolobe station with excellent buildings, largely at their cost. After 30 years of selfless service, in 1916, Mrs. Forsyth's health failed. Rheumatism crippled her ankles and feet. Reverend William Old, who had succeeded Davison at Paterson, the son of Reverend James Old of Columbus Station, Kentani District, he was born at Emgwali and educated at Cape Town and Glasgow. Old and his sister had cared for Forsyth in her declining years. Eventually, she had been unable to walk down the mountain to attend the quarterly communion at age 67. Reverend Old ended up visiting her weekly. Looking at the 1 in 50,000 map, the path from Paterson in the bottom right corner to Xolobe up in the top left was described by Reverend Mayor of Ross Mission and Tata as a sheep track which after an hour became too precipitous on horseback. One's horse had to be dismounted and led for about 15 minutes, and then it was a further hour's ride to where Forsyth lived. Another description of the route was a long stretch through a rocky canyon. then a steep climb up mountainside covered with scrub, before a rough ride through open country, before a descent by sheep and cattle track into another valley, whereafter a little knob of ground with huts came into view. In 1916, she wrote that she was breaking up. She had to return to Scotland. Her niece, Miss Mann, who was a nurse, was sent to bring her home. Every soul in the district attended her farewell meeting. She slaughtered a sheep for the occasion. She travelled to Paterson by a circuitous wagon route, which was a day's journey. Miss Old gently introduced her back into the material features of routine life during a fortnight at the Paterson Mission, before she left by ox-wagon. Beyond the Tsomo Drift or Love's Drift stood a motor car, something she had not seen before. Apparently, she adapted well to the trip to Blytheswood before going on to the Butterworth Hotel for the night. The next morning, she met her niece for the motor trip to East London and on home to Scotland, where she died in 1919, aged 75. George Stowe recorded this cave on the 23rd of April 1867. Coincidentally, this was the same year that the missionaries were all branching out into Xhosaland. He noted Xolobe as Gulube. When Victor Biggs, a descendant of traders of the Kaba and Gaika Ford locality, was researching George Stowe's 1860s work on Bushman paintings, he eventually discovered the Xolobe cave paintings. These images were recorded by Stowe, but this one was not. It was evident a skilled artist had depicted Christina Forsyth long after Stowe had made his sketch recording. This is possibly the only instance where the identity is certainly known of a person portrayed in all our extensive rock art heritage, although it is also said that there is an image of Andrew Geddes Bain. In conclusion, please allow me to state, history is not just a record of the wealth or conquests a people have accumulated, but also a record of how they deal with their environment and fellow man. I thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Hutch. We are wondering if there are any questions or comments from the audience. And if you do have a comment, could you unmute yourself? Thank you.
I'm still here.
Hello, Joe, would you like to speak?
Hi, yeah. First of all, thank you very much for that talk. I've got a few questions, if I may.
Certainly.
Thank you. My first question is around the native teacher that you mentioned who moved across from Nlecha. You said his name was Charles Henry.
That's right.
I wondered if you could say anything more about Charles Henry or a place that I could find information about him.
Yes, certainly, Joe. Sandra Rowold-Schell has just edited James Lang's diary from 1831 to 1836 or something. Anything I know about Charles Henry is recorded in Sandy Schell's excellent work.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
I have some more.
Yes, Joe.
I have the same question about the teacher you mentioned at Emily Tintili, because she has a son, I think, Paterson Tintili. Are they related, do you know? He's the Wesleyan missionary who went to Malawi.
Joe, I have no more information on Emily and Tintili, or the Tintilis. You probably know a lot more about them than I do.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a few other questions, if I may.
Yes.
Did you know, you mentioned that Malan died. I wondered if you knew how he died.
No, I don't. I think he died of old age, man. I'm not sure. I'm guessing.
Thank you very much for...
Any other questions from anyone?
That's it.
Okay, well then, again, thank you very much, Hutch, for that very interesting talk. And
I have a question.
Okay, thank you.
If I any books on the Eastern Cape, on the historical books on the Eastern Cape that you would recommend?
Ken, have you read Mostert? Noel Mostert's
Yes, I have.
Frontiers?
Yes, I have read that.
You know, and a lot of the Van Riebeeck Society books deal with the Eastern Cape, and a lot of the Grahamstown series deals with the Eastern Cape. I have found that a lot of these books are horrendously expensive, but one can access them on Google. So if you have a name or a subject that you're wanting to explore and you put it into Google, often a whole lot of things come up and you can access some wonderful texts for free.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The Grahamstown series I found is interesting, and as you say, the Van Riebeeck Society books as well.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question?
I have one more question.
Thanks, Joe.
Do you know, you mentioned that Soga worked at Xhosa as well as in Uniondale between 1848 and 1851.
Yes.
And I just wondered, how did you access the information about Xhosa?
If you Google these Presbyterians, the UPCS, if you Google that, there's on the internet a report on their missions all over the world. And one of the publications is in Kefreria, and they give a tremendous amount of interesting material. And that's one of my sources tonight. And that's where I found that information, Joe. I actually have never visited Xhosa, and I would like to visit it. I have no knowledge of it, except about, there's a lot in Frontiers about, I think it's Reverend Brown and Janet Chalmers, his wife, history there. But I did know that at the outbreak of the 1850 war, Soga was at Uniondale when the ambush took place at Boma Pass, and the Tiyo Soga's sister Tausi helped Reverend Niven and his wife escape over the mountains from Uniondale to Chumi, and it was a very traumatic experience for them, and it's well recorded and makes wonderful reading in Frontiers. But there was, I've not had more detail about Tiyo's work there or at Xhosa. But reading this recently put it into perspective for me, the fact that he was Mr. Soga and he was still he hadn't started studying theology at that stage. and he was a teacher.
I agree with you. I've the same experience of the sources. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. Any other questions?
Okay, well, then thank you very much. Just before closing, I would like to remind those of you who are still present of the BHS tour to Old Lovedale, the Chumi Valley and Hogsback on the weekend of the 29th, the 30th and the 31st of October in 2021. And the day tour of historical sites that is planned will take place on the Saturday, the 30th of October, which will make it suitable for those who can only do a day trip from East London or Port Elizabeth or Grahamstown. But if anyone needs more details, we can forward you the provisional program. But otherwise, thank you very much for making time to attend this lecture. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, very nicely spoken.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks from Port Elizabeth. Cheers.
Right.
Cheerio.